Hello and welcome to Coffee Time with Abcadeas. I am your host, Abcadeas, and this is the show where you just might see me take a sip of this here coffee, but more or less, I'm just here to rant and rave about anything and everything that interests me. Which more or less seems to be for half of my videos. I am talking on this Chinese balloon saga, which is still ongoing, and I do have a couple updates. So, today I kind of just wanted to go over a couple articles, some contradictory reports coming from the US State Department, some kind of what seems to be opposing narratives coming out of the US State Department. This kind of ties into the video I made before about how we are seeing these warring factions inside the US State Department, with the allegations against Trump and the allegations against Biden in regards to classified documents. Feel free to go back and watch that video if you would like. But since then, we've also seen some reports come out that the Pentagon was advising Ukraine to hold back all of its manpower to get them properly trained up on the new Western equipment that's being supplied and to hold off on conducting any further offensives or counteroffensives. And then we've also seen reports that the Pentagon is also advising Ukraine that the time is now or never, that they need to conduct an offensive before the Russians are able to fully build up their reserve force and conduct a full-on offensive of their own. As Alexander Mercouris kind of did comment on that, I think it is I do agree with his analysis that it is most likely the more civilian branches of the Pentagon, people that have perhaps no military experience or very little military experience, that are kind of pushing for the latter situation for Ukraine to conduct a counteroffensive or to conduct an offensive now. And then it seems to be the more military-oriented, military-experienced members of the Pentagon are recommending they wait until they can build up their strength. But why I think this is relevant is not exactly what I want to talk about, but you see this kind of mirroring itself, this kind of divide, right? This conflict in the US State Department. You can see it mirroring itself in this Chinese balloon saga. So I'm more or less going to just kind of pick a few articles here to kind of illustrate my point. The first one being is that we got this report that US intel assessing possibility that Chinese spy balloons' path over US was accidental. So, like I've said before, they have not considered this possibility once. They haven't come out and outright said it too many times, but they've stuck true to the fact that it is a Chinese balloon, it is for espionage, and it was intended to be over the United States of America. And now, this report isn't really walking back too far on the espionage claims, as it kind of goes on to say that it looked like the balloon was headed towards Guam, the U.S. island of Guam. There are military bases there, so it is the State Department's, I guess, inclination, the narrative they want to push, that this balloon was for espionage. It was just kind of away from its initial target. So still not entertaining the idea that the initial balloon wasn't for espionage. And then we had this press conference from Joe Biden today on the BBC. Here is a bit of an article about it. But basically, he's confirming that the other three objects were not, in fact, spy balloons, that they were most likely benign or for commercial purposes. Yeah, tied to some commercial or benign purpose. So the other three balloons weren't actually for espionage, and the United States, I guess, more or less just kind of wanted to prove how strong it is. They were maybe a bit embarrassed by the idea that they had the incursions under the Trump administration that went unnoticed, so they kind of wanted to make sure, I guess, that the world knew how powerful they were, and that the US military is, in fact, as strong as it once was, right? Because it kind of gave this illusion that if there was 3 separate incursions that weren't detected, you know, U.S. air defense might not be all what it's cracked up to be, or what people assume it is. So the next thing I kind of wanted to talk about, just in regards to that, I thought was kind of a funny fact I meant to include in my last video on the balloon, but I kind of forgot to, is this tweet right here. I'm going to share a link to the tweet directly. These are screenshots from one meteorologist, and then what looks like to be kind of a clone account of, I believe it was the National... NOAA is the acronym. I can't remember what it stands for. It's like Atmospheric Association. I don't know what the N and O stands for. But basically, a couple people that have some knowledge, some experience in the field of weather balloons, kind of believe that one of the 3 balloons shot down, so not the initial one, but the 3 after, that one of them might have actually belonged to the National Weather Service of America. Obviously, those are just tweets. I don't have any verification on that. I'll leave a link to this tweet below so you can kind of take a look for yourselves. But I think it would be absolutely hilarious if the U.S. shot down one of its own balloons. That would just go to show how disorganized America is as a whole, but especially how disorganized their air defense is, if they don't even know what's their balloon and what's not. But it is just speculation. These are just Twitter accounts making tweets, so there's no kind of firm confirmation of it, I guess. But I thought I'd mention it nonetheless. But the next thing, shortly after Biden gave the press conference to say the 3 balloons were most likely benign or for commercial purposes, he gave an interview, I believe it's exclusive to NBC, and while I didn't see the interview, I'm kind of just getting the footnotes of it here from the NBC article. And Biden's basically asserting that Xi wants to remain friendly with the United States, that he wouldn't do anything rash to damage the relationship with the United States. As if the Biden administration didn't just shoot down one of their balloons and did so kind of outside of international convention. Like I mentioned before, while there is no law around this, it's typically standard in international practice, especially something like a balloon. You contact the country that has it, you see what it's doing there, you figure out how it got into your airspace, why it wasn't, why they didn't ask for prior authorization, and then usually it's just kind of let go, and, you know, they let bygones be bygones. But as just a coincidence, a week before this whole balloon incident happened, you had the RAND Corporation as well as CSIS come out with separate studies. Those are think tanks in America, by the way, if you didn't know. But you had them come out with separate studies saying that, I'm paraphrasing here, but more or less they said, we need to get out of the war in Ukraine so we can get into a war with China over Taiwan. And then you had this Chinese balloon saga, and you had the balloon shot down in this, I guess, attempt to kind of puff their chests a little bit to kind of show how powerful they are. I obviously, I'm not Joe Biden, so I can't speak to exactly why he made the decision. He said that's what he was advised to do by his military advisors, but obviously a lot of those guys are vying for war with China as well. So obviously in this very delicate geopolitical situation, I'm sure the United States is going to be as cautious as they can, right? They're not going to do anything that might deliberately piss off the Chinese, like the Nancy Pelosi visit that happened last year to Taiwan. Of course, the U.S. wouldn't repeat that folly, right? I'm sure, as you can tell by my face and tone, that was sarcasm, because just before making this video, I barely read through this article yet, I'll admit, but this came up as a notification on my phone. Pentagon's top China official to visit Taiwan amid rising bilateral tensions. So I believe it said this is the first or the second trip over the last 4 decades. It might be like the third trip in the last 4 decades. But This confuses the hell out of me because so we see this Chinese balloon come out, and then you see America come out with this kind of aggressive narrative. Almost seems like they're trying to aggravate China. They're vying for conflict. And then you have these other three balloons, and you have the Pentagon say, or state officials say, I'm not sure which one it was, but that they could be linked to a larger Chinese surveillance program. And then you have the president pull back on that, saying, no, those were actually commercial or benign. They weren't for espionage. And he didn't comment on the first balloon, by the way, which is interesting. He made no comments in regards to the first balloon. And then you have Biden say, I don't think Xi Jinping is, ready for war with us. I don't think he wants to damage the relationship with the United States. So I'm sure we can get this all fixed up and ready to go. And then you get this report that the top China official of the Pentagon, the military branch of the U.S. government, is heading to Taiwan. Clearly, there is a part of the U.S. State Department that wants war with China over Taiwan. And I believe there's a second part that probably still wants war with China over Taiwan, but they maybe realize that it's not very feasible. Like the CSIS war games they conducted, they figured out the U.S. would run out of precision-guided munitions in just a week. So on top of that, you also have recent reports coming out that NATO is just not going to be able to match the shell production of Russia, let alone China. We're not even talking about a second country, but just trying to keep up with Russia in shell production. They simply can't do it. They don't have the manufacturing capacity. Western industries aren't built up to be super redundant, to have a lot of dormant production facilities that can kind of just be ramped up at any time. As everything in America is based on profit, it's not profitable to keep empty factories maintained, because obviously they still have to ensure this equipment is up and running and it's still in good working order. It's not feasible to do that. So no company is going to do that without a government mandate or a government rebate of some kind, right? And then you furthermore have the issue that shell production in general isn't that economically viable for most of the manufacturers that do it. Typically, they do it at a very low margin because you're talking about high volume production. You're talking about a lot of shells being produced. The military needs to use a lot of them, so they need to get them as cheaply as possible. Compound that with the fact that the U.S. and its allies use more complicated, higher pressure artillery systems that require shells that have a bit more complicated manufacturing process. So they're not even able to keep up with Russia at the current rate that Russia is going. We barely know anything about the actual military production numbers in China, but I can't imagine they can keep up with those numbers. I mean, even if they can, it seems like there is some caution in the U.S. State Department, but that at the same time, you have people like House Speaker Kevin McCarthy saying things like, oh, we're going to send over every U.S. representative to Taiwan. And I don't want to make any predictions, But it's hard for me to believe that this top Pentagon official is going to be able to land in Taiwan. If you had Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi going over there, basically to check on her stock investments and stir up a little trouble, didn't get anything accomplished, didn't get any deal signed or anything. If that pissed the Chinese off, right, House Speaker, politician, you could just imagine what a top military official going to Taiwan, what kind of reaction that's going to warrant. And Joe Biden is basically just hedging on the idea that Xi Jinping doesn't want to piss America off. And generally, I would be inclined to agree with this. Up until the Chinese foreign minister came out shortly after Nancy Pelosi's visit And what's kind of interesting, there's lots of history around the One China policy. The American government officially recognizes the One China policy, officially recognizes Taiwan as a part of China, that the only legitimate government of China is in Beijing. And even in articles released as recently as last year, they admit that they do not recognize Taiwanese independence. But regardless of that fact, they continue to do these random provocative moves that make it seem like they're trying to go to war with China, right? And to get back to the point I was making, up until Nancy Pelosi's visit, the foreign minister of China and most of the rhetoric coming out of China was generally that we continue to uphold the current status quo and we seek long-term peaceful reunification with Taiwan. And then after Nancy Pelosi's visit, the foreign minister came out and said, I'm going to paraphrase this a bit, but basically said, Taiwan will be reunited with the mainland. So they went from, well, we're seeking peaceful long-term reunification. You know, we'll figure it out. You know, we'll get there in a peaceful way. And they shifted to Taiwan will be reunited with the mainland. So they've clearly reached kind of the end of their rope with, in terms of patience with the United States military-industrial complex and the overall U.S. State Department pushing for this war with China. You can be almost certain that the RAND Corporation study, as well as the CSIS war games that essentially are trying to convince policymakers to go to war with China, you could be certain that those same pieces of policy paper are being read in China and have already been read and have been studied to the nth degree, and they are absolutely aware of America's intentions. So sending the top military official to Taiwan is probably going to be a big indicator, you know? It's probably going to be a big red flag for them. They're going to say, oh, so really, this is where we're going. This is what's happening. I don't know if this will become more of a rhetorical kind of back and forth where you'll have the Chinese foreign ministry come out, you'll have Chinese officials come out and say, there's no way that Pentagon official is landing in Taiwan, don't you do it. And they reach out to the Biden administration and they kind of stop this somehow. I really doubt that that's possible. Neocons tend to have one gear, and that gear is forward. Whatever their plans are, if they're working or not, they just want to go forward with them. But I fear as if this may be the tipping point. That if this official flies into Taiwanese airspace on a U.S. aircraft, I would be shocked if they are allowed to land. So that really leaves two possibilities. PLA, People's Liberation Army aircraft, the military wing of the Chinese Communist Party. We could have PLA aircraft circle this incoming vessel and stop it from landing and force it to leave Chinese airspace, which, by the way, as Taiwan is not officially recognized as a country and is officially recognized as a part of China by almost every single country on this world, save for 16, maybe 20 countries that actually recognize Taiwan as a country. But because of that, Taiwanese airspace is Chinese airspace, according to international law, international convention. So I could see the PLA Air Force kind of more or less shuttering out, that's not the word I want to use, valeting out this plane from Chinese airspace. But I could also see an order coming from either the military brass or Xi Jinping himself to shoot that thing down. And if that happens, well, let me just remind you of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And that turned out it wasn't even our enemies, and we still went to war over it anyways. So you could just imagine what would happen if China actually did shoot down a US military aircraft. Also, in the flip side of this, there's almost been a precedent set by shooting this Chinese balloon down that when another country encroaches on your airspace unannounced, you have a right to shoot down what is in your airspace that is not authorized to be there. Again, as the airspace over Taiwan and the Taiwanese Strait is internationally recognized as Chinese waters, and as American pilots and Canadian pilots and NATO pilots continue to encroach on their airspace, it's just a matter of time before that's really put to the test. I don't think China wants to be aggressive in any way. I think they know what they're dealing with, that they're dealing with an unreasonable, uncontrollable, contradictory U.S. State Department that they can't predict, and that they have to be the bigger person in the room, right? That they're going to have to let the United States get away with things that might be embarrassing to the Chinese, but it may not be the best military strategic decision to escalate the conflict at the current moment that event is happening. So, I mean, it is possible. Like I said, I would be shocked if this Pentagon official actually gets to land in Taiwan. But it is possible. If China just kind of wants to delay this conflict for a bit, they want to bide their time, build up their military resources a bit more, I could see them holding off on shooting this thing down. But you've also had China come out and now put sanctions on Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. I'll see if I can find this article while I'm talking. But basically, this is the pushback, right? So right here, China sanctions Lockheed Martin and Raytheon over Taiwan arms sales. So essentially, any product, any item coming from either of these companies, the main two manufacturers within the military-industrial complex, any of their products entering Chinese airspace, Chinese waters, trying to enter Chinese ports, are going to be banned. I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do in response if these types of weapons do show up. But you've also had all the, I guess, employees associated with the companies are now completely prohibited from doing any business in China, investing in China, even residing in China. All these people are going to be kicked out. The arms aren't going to be allowed in, and I imagine if an arms shipment is sent across those Chinese waters, that it won't make it to its intended delivery destination. But we'll see. Clearly, China is responding to this with these sanctions. They've had some pretty strong rhetoric over the past few days, but the United States is almost letting up in some ways, but not letting up in other ways, and pushing back. But, like I said, letting up. Like, I fully feel if the U.S. State Department wanted to enhance this narrative that the Chinese are conducting an elaborate espionage program in high-altitude airspace over the United States, that it would have been very, very easy for the president to just go on and say these other 3 balloons, oh, those are Chinese as well. Just how it's very easy for this administration to entirely ignore the Seymour Hersh article about the United States blowing up Nord Stream. I'm sure they could ignore the actual facts that these 3 balloons were commercial or benign. So the fact that Biden is actually coming out with this, and then right after coming out with comments that he thinks Xi Jinping wants to maintain the relationship between the United States and China, which I'm doubtful of, by the way. But given these facts, it almost seems like maybe not Biden himself, but people in his administration want to pull back a little bit. They may still want war with China, but maybe just not right now, and they think they've been a little too aggressive with this whole ordeal, so they're trying to pull it back a little bit. Or it could be the very, very, very unlikely scenario that the President of the United States felt obligated to tell the truth. I don't think that one is it. I'm not gonna lie. I think that is the least likely scenario. But it's possible. But yeah, definitely conflicting messages coming out of the U.S. State Department. It is super hard to tell at this point. I was under the assumption that they are pushing for war with China. They are absolutely all in going towards war with China. And then I see these comments from Biden today, and it makes absolutely no fucking sense to me. I can't make sense of it. Upwards or downwards, however that saying goes. But I definitely think we're still heading to war with China. It just may take a bit more time. But with that being said, like I said, Chinese military strategists are also reading these same articles, these same war games that are coming out saying the US military doesn't have enough munitions to last longer than a week. Precision-guided munitions, sorry, I should be clear there. But they're reading this stuff too. And I'm sure it's not lost on the military brass of the PLA that the United States is also aware of this fact now, and they're most likely working to remedy it. Whether or not they will be able to build up their industrial base to be able to compete with China in that way, that's another question. But if I was a Chinese military strategist, I would be doing some math right now, and it would seem like a good idea to make a move on Taiwan before the United States is fully ready to respond. But who knows? They could just be waiting for something like a Pentagon official to fly into Taiwan and shoot down that airplane to kind of set this whole powder keg off. But we don't really know. It's all guesswork until this stuff actually happens. Who knows? Maybe this Pentagon official will show up. It'll be no big deal. China will make some more crass remarks. They'll be irritated, but really it won't escalate into anything else. But we will see. As we saw, I don't really think it's that big of a deal, but the U.S. needs to get Congress to raise the debt ceiling, so basically how much the United States is allowed to be in debt, or else it fears defaulting on its loans, I think by July, September, right? And again, I'm pretty sure Congress will be able to raise that debt ceiling. It won't be a problem. But again, China is seeing all this and seeing that the United States is in extreme amounts of debt, and they need to go into even more debt just to sustain the country as it is right now. So you could just imagine if they were in a full-fledged conflict with a near-peer adversary like China. You can imagine what kind of effect that would have on the overall deficit of the United States budget. So, yep, but that is it for me today. Just some random thoughts on the Chinese balloons, plural, once again. Obviously, we know the other three aren't Chinese now, but yeah, I think that is it for me today. Again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the people that continue to tune in, even when I don't spam out the video to people. I didn't do any promotion for my video yesterday, and it still got like 7 views. So that was great. People are still tuning in, even if I don't throw the video in their face. So thank you so much for that. As always, if you have any topics, any issues you want me to do a better research in and to do some coverage on, please reach out to me either in the comment section or in a personal message if you have me on any social media. But other than that, you have yourself a gooder, right?